The fluorescent lights of Miami International Airport hummed overhead as I dragged my worn black suitcase through the crowded terminal. My law degree felt heavy in my purse, though it was just a piece of paper, expensive paper that had cost me my financial future. The crushing weight of $180,000 in student loans pressed down on my shoulders like a physical thing, making each step toward the exit feel monumental. I paused near the baggage claim carousel, checking my phone for the third time. The interview at Hartwell & Associates had gone well. At least, I thought it had. The senior partner's assistant had smiled when she'd walked me out, promising they'd be in touch soon. But soon in lawyer speak could mean anything from tomorrow to never. The smell of airport coffee and jet fuel mixed with the lingering scent of my cheap drugstore perfume. I'd splurged on a new blouse for the interview, navy blue polyester that felt professional enough, but would never fool anyone into thinking I belonged in the marble and mahogany world of corporate law. Still, it was better than admitting I'd been living on ramen noodles and hope for the past 6 months. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate Sarah. "How did it go? I made mac and cheese to celebrate, commiserate." The normalcy of it made my chest tight. Sarah didn't know about the maxed-out credit cards or the fact that I'd been dodging calls from loan servicers for weeks. She thought my post-graduation job search was typical new lawyer struggles, not the desperate scramble of someone whose safety net had holes big enough to fall through. I shifted my grip on the suitcase handle, the metal cold against my palm. The airport was beginning to empty as the afternoon stretched toward evening. But clusters of travelers still moved through the concourse like schools of fish, purposeful and swift. I envied their confidence, their obvious destinations. I was flying standby back to Atlanta, hoping for a canceled seat and praying the charge would go through on my card. A businessman in an expensive suit brushed past me, his own black suitcase nearly identical to mine except for the obvious quality difference. His wheels glided silently across the polished floor, while mine squeaked with each rotation, advertising my second-hand status to anyone within earshot. I watched him disappear into the crowd, probably heading to some corner office where junior associates fought for his approval. The departure board showed my flight was delayed another 30 minutes. I found an empty chair near gate B12 and settled in to wait, my suitcase tucked between my knees. The plastic seat was uncomfortable, designed to prevent loitering, but I was grateful for the chance to sit down. My feet ached in the pumps I'd borrowed from Sarah, half a size too small but professional enough for the interview. An announcement echoed through the terminal in English and Spanish, something about unattended baggage. I thought about the legal briefs I'd studied on the plane that morning, preparing for questions about contract law and litigation procedures. The partner had asked about my experience with international transactions, and I'd had to be honest about my lack of real-world knowledge. Fresh graduates were supposed to be eager and teachable, but I wondered if desperation showed on my face like a neon sign. When they finally called for boarding, I gathered my things and joined the line of economy passengers. The flight attendant's smile was professionally bright as she checked my boarding pass, and I tried to project confidence I didn't feel. The narrow airplane aisle forced me to bump elbows with other passengers as I searched for my seat, my suitcase heavy in my arms as I struggled to lift it into the overhead compartment. 3 hours later, I was back in Atlanta, waiting at baggage claim with dozens of other tired travelers. The carousel lurched to life with a mechanical groan, and I watched black suitcase after black suitcase tumble down the chute. When one that looked like mine appeared, I grabbed it without thinking, muscle memory guiding my actions. The handle felt right in my hand, the weight familiar enough not to question. It wasn't until I was in the taxi heading home that something felt wrong. The suitcase was heavier than I remembered, and when I tried to recall packing it that morning, the memory felt fuzzy around the edges. But I was exhausted. My mind already focused on the mac and cheese waiting at home, and the laptop where I'd refresh my email every 10 minutes, hoping for good news from Miami. Sarah was asleep on the couch when I let myself into our shared apartment, an empty bowl on the coffee table, and Netflix still playing on her laptop. I smiled despite my exhaustion, grateful for her friendship, even as guilt gnawed at me about the lies I'd been telling. She believed I was being selective about job offers, not that I was running out of options faster than I could create new ones. I wheeled the suitcase into my bedroom and left it by the closet, too tired to unpack. Tomorrow I'd deal with laundry and thank you emails and the growing pile of bills on my desk. Tonight, I just wanted to forget about student loans and failed interviews and the growing certainty that my law degree might be worthless. I changed into pajamas and brushed my teeth with the efficiency of someone who'd perfected the art of getting ready in shared spaces. The bathroom mirror reflected a face that looked older than my 25 years, stress etched in the lines around my eyes. Law school had aged me in ways that had nothing to do with the 3 years it had taken to complete. Back in my room, I glanced at the suitcase one more time. Something about it nagged at the edge of my consciousness, but I couldn't pinpoint what. Maybe it was just the weight of the day, the accumulated anxiety of another failed opportunity. I'd been living on the edge of financial disaster for so long that even small changes felt like harbingers of catastrophe. My phone showed 2 missed calls from an unknown number, but when I tried to call back, it went straight to voicemail. Probably another debt collector who'd found my current number. I'd learned to let unknown calls go to voicemail, screening for actual opportunities among the threats and demands for money I didn't have. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on Peachtree Street. I loved this neighborhood despite the rent that stretched my budget past breaking. It felt like the kind of place where successful young professionals lived, even if I was only pretending to be one of them. I pulled back the covers on my bed, a queen-size mattress on the floor that Sarah and I had rescued from someone's curb 3 months ago. It was comfortable enough, and the sheets were clean, which was more than I'd had during the last year of law school when I'd been living on loans and prayer. As I drifted toward sleep, my mind wandered to the interview. The senior partner had asked about my long-term goals, and I'd given him the answer I thought he wanted to hear. Something about building expertise in corporate law and contributing to the firm's growth. What I should have said was that I just wanted a job that would pay my bills and maybe leave enough over for groceries that didn't come from a box. The suitcase sat in the corner like a silent witness to my struggles, black fabric blending into the shadows. I'd deal with it tomorrow, along with everything else I'd been putting off. Tonight, exhaustion won out over anxiety, and I let sleep pull me under. I woke to sunlight streaming through the blinds and the sound of Sarah's coffee maker gurgling to life in the kitchen. For a moment I lay still, letting myself believe that yesterday's interview had gone better than it felt, that my phone might buzz with good news before I was fully awake. But reality settled back into my chest like a familiar weight, and I reached for my phone to check the time. 9:30. I'd slept later than intended, though I had nowhere particular to be. The luxury of sleeping in felt hollow when it came from unemployment rather than choice. My phone showed 3 more missed calls from the same unknown number, plus a voicemail that had come in around midnight. The persistent caller sent a chill down my spine. Debt collectors were getting more aggressive these days. I shuffled to the kitchen where Sarah was already dressed for her job at the marketing firm. Her auburn hair perfectly styled, and her makeup flawless. She looked like the kind of put-together professional I'd imagined myself becoming, back when law school felt like a guaranteed path to success, rather than an expensive mistake. "Morning, sunshine," she said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "How'd you sleep? You looked exhausted when you got in last night." "Like the dead," I admitted, accepting the mug gratefully. The coffee was Sarah's expensive brand, not the generic store brand I'd been buying when I remembered to buy coffee at all. "Thanks for waiting up. Sorry I was so out of it." "No problem. So how did Miami go? You never texted me back." Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, and I felt the familiar stab of guilt about lying to someone who'd been nothing but supportive. "It went well, I think. Hard to tell with these corporate firms. They keep their cards close to their chest." The practiced response rolled off my tongue easily. I'd become skilled at deflecting questions about my job search, turning hope into confidence for Sarah's benefit. She nodded knowingly. They're probably just comparing candidates. You'll hear something soon, I'm sure. Your credentials are incredible, Madison. Any firm would be lucky to have you. The sincere faith in her voice made my stomach twist with guilt. After Sarah left for work, I took my coffee back to my room, intending to update my resume and send out another round of applications. But the suitcase in the corner caught my attention again, that nagging sense of wrongness stronger in the morning light. I set down my mug and approached it slowly, running my fingers over the familiar-looking fabric. The weight was definitely wrong. I lifted it onto my bed and stared at the combination lock, trying to remember what numbers I'd used. 317? My birthday? But when I tried those combinations, nothing happened. The lock didn't budge, which was impossible since I'd opened it just yesterday morning to pack my interview clothes. My heart began to race as I examined the suitcase more carefully. The brand name was the same, American Tourister, but the fabric felt higher quality than I remembered. The wheels were different too, smooth and silent instead of the squeaky protests I'd grown accustomed to. There was a leather tag attached to the handle that I definitely didn't remember, expensive looking and engraved with initials. MV. Oh God, I whispered to my empty room. This isn't mine. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd taken someone else's suitcase at the airport, which meant someone else had mine. Someone with the initials MV was probably discovering my collection of discount interview clothes and wondering where their belongings had gone. The mortification was immediate and overwhelming. What if they'd had something important in there? I grabbed my phone and pulled up the airline's customer service number, my fingers shaking as I dialed. The hold music was tinny and repetitive, punctuated by recorded messages about high call volume and potential wait times. When a representative finally answered, her voice was professionally cheerful, but strained. I need to report a baggage mix-up, I said, launching into an explanation of the situation. I accidentally took someone else's suitcase yesterday. Black American Tourister. Looks almost identical to mine. The owner's initials are MV. There was a pause, the sound of typing. I'm showing several reports of missing baggage from yesterday's flights. Can you give me your confirmation number? I rattled off the information while she searched their system. More typing, longer pauses. I'm not seeing an exact match for your description, but I can file a report and flag your bag for retrieval. What's the other party's contact information? I don't have it. That's why I'm calling you. Frustration crept into my voice despite my efforts to stay calm. There's a luggage tag with initials, but no phone number or address. Without the other party's information, it's difficult to coordinate an exchange. I can put you on our callback list if someone reports a missing bag that matches your description. The representative's tone suggested this was a common problem with an uncommon solution. After 20 minutes of circular conversation, I hung up feeling more anxious than before. The suitcase sat on my bed like evidence of a crime I'd accidentally committed. What if MV had needed whatever was inside for a business meeting or family emergency? What if my cheap clothes and drugstore toiletries had embarrassed them somehow? The unknown caller had tried again while I was on hold with the airline. This time they'd left a voicemail, and something about the timing made my stomach clench with dread. I hit play and listened to a man's voice, calm and professional with the barest hint of an accent I couldn't place. Ms. Harper, this is regarding an item that belongs to me. I believe you may have acquired it by mistake. I'd very much like to arrange its return. Please call me back at this number as soon as possible. Time is somewhat critical. The message ended with a soft click that somehow sounded more ominous than any threat. He knew my name, which meant he had my suitcase, but something about his tone made me reluctant to call back immediately. There was an undercurrent of tension beneath the polite words, a suggestion that this was more serious than a simple baggage mix-up. I stared at the locked suitcase, wondering what could be inside that would make time critical. Documents? Medication? The possibilities spiraled through my mind, each worse than the last. What if MV was some kind of businessman who'd needed the contents for a crucial meeting? What if I'd inadvertently sabotaged someone's career the way mine seemed to be sabotaging itself? My laptop was still open on my desk, job search websites bookmarked and waiting for my attention. But I couldn't focus on cover letters and application deadlines with this mystery weighing on me. I found myself pacing the small room, phone in hand, debating whether to return the call. The professional tone of the voicemail suggested someone important, someone with resources I couldn't match. If MV was a corporate executive or high-powered attorney, they probably had assistants to handle problems like this. They might even have lawyers. The thought sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. What if they thought I'd stolen the suitcase intentionally? I tried the combination lock again, using random numbers this time. 777-123-000. Nothing worked, and I was beginning to feel like a criminal for trying. But the weight of the thing nagged at me, too heavy for clothes alone. What could be so important that someone would track down my personal information within 12 hours of landing? My phone rang, making me jump. The same unknown number calling again. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the answer button. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail again, to buy more time to figure out what to do. But the rational part of my mind knew I couldn't avoid this forever. Hello? My voice came out smaller than intended. Ms. Harper. The same calm voice from the voicemail, though warmer now that we were speaking directly. Thank you for answering. I'm Marcus Volkov. I believe you have something that belongs to me. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it suggested it should. There was confidence in his tone, the kind that came from being accustomed to having problems solved quickly and efficiently. Mr. Volkov, yes, I'm so sorry about the mix-up. I realized this morning that I must have taken your suitcase by mistake at the airport. These things happen, he said, though something in his voice suggested they didn't happen to him very often. The important thing is correcting the error. Are you available to meet today? I'd prefer to handle this exchange in person. Something about the request made me hesitate. Maybe it was the formal way he spoke, or the slight edge beneath his politeness. I could drop it off somewhere if that's easier. Your office, maybe, or... I'd rather meet in person, he interrupted gently. There are verification procedures that need to be followed to ensure we both receive the correct items. That made sense, I supposed, though I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than a simple suitcase swap. Where did you want to meet? There's a coffee shop on Peachtree near the Arts Center station. Grind Coffee. Do you know it? I did. It was walking distance from my apartment. The kind of place where freelancers and grad students camped out with laptops and oversized mugs. I can be there in an hour, I said, already mentally calculating how long it would take to shower and make myself presentable. Perfect. I'll be at a corner table wearing a dark suit. And Ms. Harper? He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a note of something I couldn't quite identify. Please bring everything exactly as you found it. The line went dead before I could ask what he meant by that. I stared at my phone, replaying the conversation in my mind. Everything about Marcus Volkov suggested money and power, the way he spoke, his expectation that I'd be available immediately, his preference for handling things personally, rather than through assistance or delivery services. I dragged the suitcase to my closet and tried to decide what to wear to meet someone who was clearly more successful than me. My interview clothes were in my actual suitcase, wherever that was, leaving me with casual options that suddenly felt shabby and inappropriate. I settled on dark jeans and a sweater, hoping to strike a balance between respectful and not trying too hard. In the shower, I let the hot water wash away some of my anxiety while I practiced what I'd say. A simple apology for the inconvenience, an explanation of the honest mistake. Maybe a self-deprecating comment about the hazards of traveling with generic luggage. I'd be gracious and professional, the kind of person who could be trusted to handle mistakes responsibly. But as I dried my hair and applied makeup, the weight of the suitcase seemed to grow heavier in my peripheral vision. Whatever was inside had Marcus Volkov tracking down my personal information and insisting on an immediate meeting. That level of urgency suggested something more valuable than clothes and toiletries. The walk to grind coffee gave me time to rehearse my apology and observe the neighborhood I'd been living in but couldn't really afford. Peachtree Street was lined with the kind of businesses that catered to young professionals. Trendy restaurants, boutique fitness studios, artisanal everything. I felt like an imposter among the people who actually belonged here. People who could afford $30 brunch and didn't check their bank balance before buying coffee. Grind Coffee was busier than I'd expected for mid-morning, filled with the usual mix of remote workers and people who seemed to have nowhere more pressing to be. I spotted him immediately, despite never having seen him before. Marcus Volkov commanded attention without trying, his presence making the busy coffee shop feel suddenly quiet and focused. He was younger than his voice had suggested, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and the kind of sharp features that belonged in magazine ads for expensive watches. His suit was charcoal gray and fit him perfectly, the kind of tailoring that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But it was his eyes that made me pause in the doorway, pale blue and assessing, missing nothing as they tracked my approach. "Ms. Harper," he said, rising from his chair with fluid grace. His handshake was firm but brief, and I caught a hint of expensive cologne that made me suddenly conscious of my drugstore perfume. "Please, sit." The suitcase felt heavier than ever as I maneuvered it beside my chair. Marcus Volkov's attention never left it, though his expression remained pleasantly neutral. Up close, I could see the quality of everything he wore. The silk tie, the Italian leather shoes, the watch that caught light like it was made of actual diamonds. "Again, I'm so sorry about the mix-up," I began, but he held up a hand to stop me. "No apology necessary. These things happen more often than you'd think." He signaled the barista for coffee, without taking his eyes off me. "Tell me, Ms. Harper, what do you do?" The question caught me off guard. "I'm an attorney. Well, recently graduated, still looking for the right position." The practiced response felt hollow in the face of his obvious success. "Ah, a lawyer." Something flickered in his expression, though I couldn't read it. "And what brings you to Miami? Business or pleasure?" I found myself explaining the interview, the job search, the challenges facing new graduates in a competitive market. Marcus listened with the kind of focused attention that made me feel like the most important person in the room, asking follow-up questions that suggested genuine interest, rather than polite conversation. When our coffee arrived, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with those unsettling blue eyes. "You seem like an intelligent woman, Ms. Harper. Observant. I imagine that serves you well in legal work." "I try to pay attention to details," I said, wondering where this was leading. "Good. Then perhaps you noticed that the suitcase you're carrying isn't the one you packed." His tone remained conversational, but something had shifted in the atmosphere between us. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Yes, I realized this morning when I couldn't open the lock. I called the airline, but they said they needed your contact information to coordinate an exchange. And yet here we are," he said, smiling slightly. "Sometimes direct communication is more efficient than bureaucracy." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. "Volkov International," it read. "Import, export." No specific job title, just his name and contact information. The cardstock was heavy and expensive, the kind that made a statement about the person carrying it. "You're in import or export," I said, trying to place what that might mean for someone who could afford to dress like a Fortune 500 CEO. "Among other things." His answer was deliberately vague. "I deal in various commodities. Some more, specialized than others." Before I could ask what that meant, he leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Harper, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be completely honest with me. Have you opened the suitcase?" The directness of the question made my stomach clench. No, I couldn't. The combination didn't work. "Did you try to open it?" I felt like I was being cross-examined, though his tone remained friendly. "I tried a few obvious combinations this morning. My birthday? Simple sequences. Nothing worked." He nodded, as if this satisfied him. "And you haven't shown it to anyone else? Roommate? Family member? Anyone?" "No one." The questions were making me increasingly uncomfortable. "Mr. Volkov, is there something I should know? You're asking these questions like what? Like there's something dangerous inside." The words came out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted the admission. Marcus Volkov set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. When he looked at me again, the friendly mask had slipped slightly, revealing something colder underneath. "Ms. Harper, what would you say if I told you that the contents of that suitcase are worth more than you'll earn in your entire legal career?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could feel my pulse quickening, some primal instinct recognizing that this conversation had moved beyond polite small talk into territory I didn't understand. The busy coffee shop suddenly felt very far away, despite the conversations and coffee grinder noise continuing around us. "I'd say that sounds like something I definitely shouldn't have accidentally taken," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. A reasonable response. He stood smoothly, pulling bills from his wallet and leaving them on the table. "I think it's time we retrieved both of our belongings, don't you?" It wasn't really a question. The ride in Marcus Volkov's car was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The black Mercedes was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat, the leather seats soft as butter beneath my nervous hands. He'd insisted on driving to retrieve my suitcase from his associate, and something about the way he'd said the word made me reluctant to argue. We'd left the coffee shop together, him carrying the mistaken suitcase like it weighed nothing, despite its obvious heft. I'd tried to maintain casual conversation during the short walk to his car, but my voice sounded strained even to my own ears. The questions he'd asked had planted seeds of anxiety that were growing with each passing minute. "Your suitcase is safe," Marcus said, breaking the silence as we merged onto the highway. His hands on the steering wheel were steady, manicured but strong, with a subtle scar across the knuckles of his right hand. "My people are very careful with other people's property." "Your people?" The phrase sent another chill through me. Who had people? Security consultants. They handle various aspects of my business operations. His tone suggested this was a perfectly normal thing to have, though I'd never met anyone who casually referenced their security team. We were heading north, away from the city center and into areas I didn't recognize. The buildings grew sparser, more industrial, the kind of neighborhood where warehouses and distribution centers clustered around freight rail lines. I tried to remember if I'd told anyone where I was going, but Sarah was at work, and I hadn't thought to leave a note. "Mr. Volkov, can I ask what kind of import-export business you're in?" I kept my voice carefully neutral, though my hands were starting to sweat despite the car's perfect climate control. "International trade is complex, Ms. Harper. Many different commodities, many different markets." He glanced at me briefly, those pale blue eyes unreadable. "Some transactions require more discretion than others." The evasiveness was starting to feel deliberate, and I found myself cataloging details I hadn't noticed before. The car's windows were tinted darker than normal, and there was something that looked like a security panel built into the dashboard. Marcus's suit jacket hung perfectly, but I caught a glimpse of something bulky beneath his left arm when he'd reached for the seatbelt. "Are you carrying a gun?" The question escaped before I could stop it, my lawyer's instinct for direct examination overriding common sense. Marcus didn't seem surprised by the question. "I am. Does that concern you?" "Should it?" My mouth was dry, but I forced myself to meet his gaze when he looked at me again. That depends entirely on you, Ms. Harper. There was no threat in his voice, but the implication was clear enough. I find that honest communication prevents misunderstandings. We turned into an industrial complex, past a security guard who waved Marcus through without checking credentials. The buildings here were anonymous concrete and steel, the kind of places where businesses operated away from public scrutiny. My heart was racing now, every instinct screaming that I'd made a terrible mistake by getting in this car. Mr. Volkov, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I just want to exchange suitcases and go home. I tried to keep my voice steady, but panic was creeping into my chest like cold water. I understand completely, and we will exchange them, as promised. He pulled into a parking space beside a nondescript warehouse. But first, I need you to understand something important about the situation we're both in. The engine went quiet, and suddenly the only sound was my own breathing. Marcus turned in his seat to face me fully, and I could see details I'd missed in the coffee shop. The way his expensive shirt couldn't quite hide the muscle definition beneath, the calculating intelligence in his eyes, the complete absence of uncertainty in his posture. Ms. Harper, the contents of that suitcase represent a significant business transaction, the kind that, if compromised, would create problems for a great many people. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I shook my head, though I was beginning to have a terrible suspicion. Not really, no. Then let me be more direct. The items you accidentally acquired are not the kind that can be reported to authorities or claimed through normal channels. They require careful handling by people who understand the importance of discretion. The word discretion seemed to echo in the quiet car. I thought about the weight of the suitcase, the way he'd tracked down my personal information within hours, the security guards and associates and careful questions about whether I'd opened it or shown it to anyone. Oh God, I whispered. It's something illegal, isn't it? Marcus studied my face for a long moment. That's a very broad term, Ms. Harper. What's illegal in one jurisdiction may be perfectly acceptable in another. What matters is that certain interested parties would be very unhappy if those items went missing or fell into the wrong hands. What kind of interested parties? But even as I asked, I was beginning to understand. The expensive clothes, the security team, the way he spoke about commodities and transactions. I'd stumbled into something far beyond a simple baggage mix-up. The kind who don't typically accept explanations about honest mistakes, he said quietly. Which is why I need to know exactly what happened from the moment you left the airport until this morning. I found myself recounting every detail, the taxi ride home, falling asleep without unpacking, Sarah on the couch, the calls I'd ignored. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as I described the timeline. And your roommate never saw the suitcase? She was asleep when I got home. I took it straight to my room. The significance of this seemed to register with him, and some of the tension left his shoulders. Good. That's very good. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text, then turned back to me. Ms. Harper, I'm going to ask something of you, and I hope you'll consider it carefully. What? I need you to forget this incident ever happened. Forget my name. Forget what you've learned about my business. Forget that you ever had possession of that suitcase. His voice was calm but firm. In exchange, you'll receive your belongings and a small compensation for your inconvenience. Compensation? The word came out as a squeak. $50,000. Cash. Enough to handle your student loans and give you some breathing room while you establish your legal career. The number hit me like a physical blow. $50,000 was more money than I'd ever had at one time. More than I'd earn in my first year at most firms, if I even found a position. It was freedom from the crushing debt that woke me up at night in a cold sweat. You want to pay me $50,000 to forget this happened? I want to ensure that a promising young lawyer doesn't accidentally compromise her future by becoming involved in matters that don't concern her. There was something almost gentle in his tone now. You seem like an intelligent woman, Ms. Harper. I'm sure you understand that some knowledge comes with costs that aren't worth paying. I stared at him, trying to process the offer and its implications. $50,000 in exchange for silence about something I didn't even fully understand. It sounded like something from a movie, not something that happened to unemployed lawyers who lived on ramen noodles and hope. What if I say no? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made my chest tight. I would be very disappointed, and disappointment, in my line of work, tends to create complications that are difficult to resolve cleanly. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I thought about the security guards, the associates, the way he'd found my personal information so quickly. Marcus Volkov wasn't just wealthy. He was connected in ways that existed outside normal legal channels. I need to see my suitcase first, I said, surprised by my own boldness. I need to know that you actually have it. He smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. Of course, a reasonable request. We got out of the car and walked toward the warehouse entrance. The building was larger than it had appeared from outside, with loading docks and the kind of industrial infrastructure that suggested serious commercial operations. Marcus used a keycard to open a side door, and we entered a corridor that smelled of concrete and metal. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was inside. Our footsteps echoed off polished floors, and I could hear the hum of air conditioning, but none of the noise I'd expected from an active warehouse. Marcus led me past several closed doors to an elevator that required another keycard to operate. Mr. Volkov, I said as we rose to the second floor. What exactly do you import and export? Many things, he replied. Art, antiquities, specialty items for collectors. The kind of objects that require careful handling and discreet transportation. The elevator opened onto a hallway, lined with what looked like office doors. But when Marcus opened one of them, I found myself looking into something that resembled a conference room crossed with a vault. The walls were lined with monitors showing security camera feeds, and there was a large table in the center, surrounded by chairs that looked like they'd come from a Fortune 500 boardroom. My suitcase sat on the table like evidence in a courtroom. There it is, Marcus said, gesturing toward it. Exactly as my people found it in the carousel. Nothing missing, nothing disturbed. I approached it cautiously, running my hands over the familiar scratches and wear marks that proved it was really mine. The combination lock was still set to my mother's birthday, and when I opened it, everything was exactly as I'd packed it. Interview clothes, toiletries, the lucky pen I'd carried through law school. Satisfied? Marcus asked. I nodded, though seeing my belongings intact only made the situation feel more surreal. This elaborate operation, this secure facility, the money he was offering, all for a suitcase mix-up that could have been resolved with a simple phone call. Now, he said, settling into one of the leather chairs, let's discuss our arrangement. But before I could respond, the door opened and another man entered. He was older than Marcus, probably in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that suggested he was accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His suit was even more expensive than Marcus's, and when he looked at me, his dark eyes held a calculation that made me want to disappear. This is her? He asked, his accent more pronounced than Marcus's but equally unplaceable. Ms. Harper, meet my associate, Victor Kozlov, Marcus said. He's been helping coordinate our response to yesterday's complication. Victor studied me like I was a problem to be solved. She understands the situation? We're discussing it now, Marcus replied, though there was a subtle tension between the two men that I didn't understand. Victor moved to another chair, but instead of sitting, he remained standing, his attention fixed on me. Ms. Harper, I hope you appreciate how fortunate you are. In other circumstances, this kind of mistake would be handled very differently. The way he said mistake made it clear that he didn't believe it was accidental. I felt like I was being interrogated by two very dangerous men who were deciding my fate based on answers I didn't know how to give. I told Mr. Volkov it was completely accidental. I just grabbed the wrong suitcase at baggage claim. My voice sounded small in the large room. Of course you did, Victor said, though his tone suggested otherwise. And now you've seen more than you should have seen, learned more than you should have learned. That creates problems. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Victor, we've discussed this. Ms. Harper has been cooperative and discreet. There's no reason to complicate matters. No reason. Victor's eyebrows rose. She's a lawyer, Marcus. Lawyers have obligations to report certain activities to authorities. They take oaths about justice and legal ethics. The way he said legal ethics made it sound like a personal insult. I realized that whatever was in that suitcase, whatever Marcus's business really involved, these men saw my profession as a threat to their operations. I haven't seen anything, I said quickly. I don't know anything about your business, and I don't want to know. I just want to take my suitcase and go home. Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. What you want, my dear, is irrelevant. What matters is what you now know, and what you might do with that knowledge. Marcus stood, and I caught a glimpse of tension in his posture. Victor, we agreed on an approach. Ms. Harper accepts our offer, signs a non-disclosure agreement, and this matter is resolved cleanly. Your approach assumes she can be trusted to honor such an agreement, Victor replied. I prefer more. Permanent solutions to potential problems. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. I looked between the two men, beginning to understand that I'd become the subject of a disagreement between people who resolved disputes in ways that didn't involve courts or mediation. What kind of permanent solutions? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Victor smiled, and it was the most frightening expression I'd ever seen. The kind that ensure complete confidentiality, Ms. Harper. The kind that remove all possibility of future complications. Marcus moved closer to me, and I caught the subtle shift in his posture that suggested he was positioning himself between Victor and me. Ms. Harper will accept our offer, he said firmly. There's no need for alternative approaches. Are you certain? Victor's question seemed to carry weight beyond its simple words. Because once we commit to this path, we can't easily change course if she proves unreliable. I found myself looking at Marcus, realizing that he was somehow protecting me from something much worse than anything I'd imagined. The $50,000 wasn't just payment for silence. It was the price of staying alive. I'll take the money, I said quickly. I'll sign whatever you want me to sign. I just want to go home and forget this ever happened. Victor studied me for another long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. But understand, Ms. Harper, that agreements with people like us are not like contracts you might handle in your legal practice. They are absolute, permanent, and the consequences of violating them are severe. Marcus moved to a cabinet and withdrew a manila folder. Standard non-disclosure agreement, he said, placing it on the table. It covers any and all activities you may have observed or become aware of during this incident. I flipped through the pages, my legal training automatically scanning the dense text. It was comprehensive and terrifying, broad enough to cover virtually anything I might have learned or suspected, with penalties that included not just financial damages, but criminal prosecution for industrial espionage and violation of international trade agreements. This says I could face federal charges if I break the agreement, I said. Among other consequences, Victor added meaningfully. I signed the papers with a hand that trembled only slightly, watched Marcus witness my signature, and accepted an envelope that Victor assured me contained exactly $50,000 in unmarked bills. The money felt heavier than it should have, weighted with implications I was only beginning to understand. Now, Marcus said, his tone returning to the polite professionalism from the coffee shop. Let's get you home. But as we prepared to leave, Victor called my name one final time. Ms. Harper, he said, his voice carrying across the room like a promise. "Welcome to a very exclusive club. Membership has its privileges, but the dues are quite steep if you fall behind on payments." I nodded, clutching the envelope and my suitcase, and followed Marcus back to the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of Victor watching us with those calculating dark eyes, and I knew that whatever I'd stumbled into, there would be no simple way out. The ride back to my apartment passed in tense silence, both of us lost in thoughts we couldn't share. When Marcus finally pulled up outside my building, he turned to me one last time. "Ms. Harper, I hope you understand that what happened today was a kindness. There are others in my organization who would have handled the situation very differently." "I understand," I said, though I wasn't sure I understood anything anymore. "Good. Then you'll also understand that this is the beginning of a relationship, not the end of one. The money comes with expectations of continued discretion and availability should we need to. Clarify certain aspects of our agreement." The words sent ice through my veins. Availability for what? Nothing onerous. Occasional consultations on legal matters that might benefit from your expertise. Think of it as a very well-compensated retainer arrangement. Before I could ask what kind of legal matters might require such secrecy, he was out of the car and opening my door with the same polite efficiency he'd shown all day. As I walked toward my building, suitcase in one hand and envelope in the other, I felt his eyes on my back until I was safely inside. Only when I was back in my apartment, door locked and deadbolt engaged, did I allow myself to really look at the money. $50,000 in hundreds, more cash than I'd ever seen in one place. It was freedom from debt, security, a fresh start. It was also evidence of how thoroughly my life had just changed. 3 weeks passed before Marcus contacted me again. 3 weeks during which I tried to convince myself that the warehouse meeting had been a one-time encounter, that the money was payment for silence and nothing more. I'd deposited $40,000 in a savings account and used $10,000 to make a significant dent in my student loans, telling Sarah I'd received a signing bonus from a firm that required confidentiality during their vetting process. The lie came easily, but it sat heavily in my chest alongside the growing certainty that I was living on borrowed time. Every knock at the door made my heart race. Every unknown number triggered a spike of anxiety. I'd started checking the locks twice before bed and found myself scanning crowds for faces I might recognize from the warehouse. The job search that had once consumed my days felt suddenly trivial. How could I focus on cover letters and interview preparation when I had $50,000 of questionable money in my bank account and a non-disclosure agreement that essentially made me property of Marcus Volkov's organization? I went through the motions of applying for positions, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. Sarah noticed the change, of course. Over dinner at our usual Tuesday night spot, a Thai restaurant where we split entrees and agonized over whether we could afford appetizers, she finally called me on it. "You've been different since Miami," she said, twirling pad thai around her fork with surgical precision. "Distracted, almost jumpy. Did something happen at that interview?" I pushed chicken around my plate, buying time to construct another lie. "Just job search stress. The market's tougher than I expected." "But you said the firm was promising, that they'd be in touch soon." Her brown eyes were sharp with concern. "It's been 3 weeks, Madison. Have you heard anything?" The truth was that I'd never followed up with Hartwell and Associates. The interview that had once felt so important now seemed like it belonged to someone else's life, someone who hadn't accidentally stumbled into the criminal underworld and emerged $50,000 richer. "These things take time," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Corporate firms move slowly." Sarah nodded, but I could see she wasn't entirely convinced. "Maybe you should consider smaller firms, boutique practices, public interest work. The money might not be as good, but—" "Money isn't everything," I interrupted, then immediately regretted the words. 3 weeks ago, money had been everything. Now I had more than I'd ever possessed, and it felt like a weight around my neck. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and wondering what Marcus Volkov was doing. Was he conducting more mysterious business transactions? Meeting with associates like Victor who preferred permanent solutions to problems? The envelope of money sat in my closet like evidence of a crime I'd committed without meaning to. At 2 a.m, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Coffee tomorrow. Same place, same time. M. I stared at the message until the screen went dark, then read it again when I touched the phone back to life. Part of me had been expecting this, dreading it, but another part felt almost relieved. The waiting was over. I texted back, "I'll be there." The reply came immediately. Good. Grind coffee looked exactly the same as it had 3 weeks earlier, but I felt like a different person walking through the door. The money had changed something fundamental about how I move through the world, adding a layer of hypervigilance that made every conversation feel potentially dangerous. I'd dressed carefully, professional but not too formal, approachable but not vulnerable. Marcus was already there, of course, occupying the same corner table with the same quiet authority. But this time he wasn't alone. A woman sat across from him, brunette hair pulled back in a severe chignon, wearing a charcoal suit that screamed expensive lawyer. She looked up when I approached, and her dark eyes held the kind of sharp intelligence that made me immediately self-conscious. "Ms. Harper." Marcus rose with the same fluid grace I remembered. "Thank you for coming. I'd like you to meet Elena Vasquez, my legal counsel." Elena stood and extended her hand with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Ms. Harper, I've heard interesting things about you." Her handshake was firm and brief, and I caught the subtle way she assessed my clothes, my posture, my general presence. This was someone accustomed to evaluating people quickly and accurately, filing away details that might prove useful later. "Please, sit." Marcus gestured to the empty chair. "Elena has some proposals I think you'll find interesting." I settled into the seat, acutely aware that I was outnumbered by people who understood this world far better than I did. "What kind of proposals?" Elena opened a leather portfolio and withdrew several documents. "Mr. Volkov tells me you're a recent law school graduate having difficulty finding suitable employment." "The market is competitive," I said carefully. "Indeed, particularly for someone with significant educational debt and no substantial connections in the legal community." She spoke like she was reading from my financial records, which she probably was. "However, you possess certain qualities that make you valuable to specialized practices." "What qualities?" "Intelligence, obviously, legal training, and most importantly, discretion." Elena slid a document across the table. "We'd like to offer you a position." I stared at the paper without picking it up. "What kind of position?" Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Legal consultant for various business operations. Document review, contract analysis, regulatory compliance research. Nothing that would compromise your professional ethics." Nothing that would compromise them more than they already had been, he meant. I picked up the document and began reading. It was a consulting agreement, elegantly written and deliberately vague about specific duties. The compensation section made me blink twice. $5,000 per project, with an estimated 2 to 3 projects per month. "This is a lot of money," I said. "We pay well for quality work," Elena replied, "and for the kind of discretion this work requires." What exactly would I be doing? Marcus and Elena exchanged a glance that suggested they'd rehearsed this conversation. "Various legal research projects," Elena said. "Due diligence on potential business partners, regulatory analysis for international transactions, contract review for specialized acquisitions." The words sounded legitimate, but the context made everything suspect. International transactions in what? "Art, antiquities, specialty imports," Marcus said, using the same vague language from our first conversation. "The kind of high-value items that require careful legal handling." I thought about the weight of the suitcase, the security measures at the warehouse, Victor's threats about permanent solutions. And if I decline this generous offer? Then you decline, Elena said smoothly. Though I suspect a young lawyer with your financial obligations would find it difficult to pass up such an opportunity. There was no explicit threat, but the implication was clear. They knew about my debt, my failed job search, my desperate financial situation. The $50,000 had been the carrot. This was showing me the stick. I need time to think about it, I said. Of course. Marcus signaled for the check. Take all the time you need. But Elena will need an answer by Friday if you want to start with next week's project. 5 days. They were giving me 5 days to decide whether to formally join whatever organization had already claimed me through accident and circumstance. What happens if I take the job and then want to quit? Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. Employment agreements in specialized fields often include restrictive covenants, non-compete clauses, confidentiality provisions, that sort of thing. Breaking such agreements can have serious professional and personal consequences. What kind of consequences? The kind that make it very difficult to practice law anywhere, Marcus said quietly. Elena has extensive experience with professional misconduct proceedings. She could provide you with detailed examples of how careers can be destroyed by poor decision-making. The threat was wrapped in polite language, but it was still a threat. Take the job, or face professional ruin. Work for us, or be destroyed by us. The choice was as illusory as my freedom had been since the moment I'd taken the wrong suitcase. I understand, I said, standing up. I'll have an answer for you by Friday. Elena handed me a business card with only her name and a phone number. We look forward to working with you, Ms. Harper. As I walked home, their words echoed in my mind. The $15,000 per month they were offering was more than I'd make at most entry-level positions, enough to pay off my loans and live comfortably while building a career. But it was also money earned by helping people who threatened lawyers and conducted business in warehouse meeting rooms. Sarah was at work when I got back to the apartment, leaving me alone with documents I couldn't fully understand and a decision that would define the rest of my life. I spread Elena's contract across the kitchen table and read it 3 times, my legal training picking up nuances that made my stomach clench. The non-disclosure provisions were absolute. The termination clauses essentially made me property of the organization for an indefinite period. The scope of work was broad enough to include virtually anything they wanted me to do. It was a masterpiece of legal entrapment, dressed up as a generous employment offer. But it was also survival. $15,000 per month, guaranteed for at least a year according to the minimum compensation clause. Enough money to transform my life from desperate struggle to comfortable security. All I had to do was compromise every principle I'd learned in law school and help criminals legitimize their operations. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. How did the meeting go? Good news, I hope. I stared at the message, knowing she was asking about a fictional interview I'd invented to explain my absence. The lies were multiplying, creating a parallel version of my life where I was still the idealistic young lawyer she'd known in school, rather than someone who'd been bought and owned by people like Marcus Volkov. Still waiting to hear, I texted back, adding another deception to the growing pile. That evening, I researched Elena Vasquez online, finding an impressive legal career that included time at prestigious firms and specialized practices. Her current firm, Vasquez and Associates, seemed to focus on international business law and regulatory compliance. From the outside, it looked completely legitimate. But then, so did Marcus's import-export business until you looked closer. I spent hours reading about money laundering, racketeering, the ways criminal organizations use legitimate businesses and legal professionals to hide illegal activities. The more I read, the more certain I became that Marcus's offer wasn't about my legal skills. It was about my vulnerability and desperation. Young lawyers with crushing debt were perfect targets for recruitment. We needed money badly enough to rationalize questionable work, but we also had just enough training to be useful for document review and regulatory research. And once we took the money, once we signed the agreements, we became complicit in ways that made escape nearly impossible. By Thursday night, I'd made my decision. I called Elena's number and left a voicemail accepting the position. The relief I felt was immediate and terrible. Relief at having money, terror at what I'd agreed to do to earn it. Friday morning brought my first assignment. A thick envelope delivered to my apartment by a courier who wouldn't meet my eyes. Inside were contracts in Russian and English, bills of lading for shipping containers, and financial documents from banks I'd never heard of. A note from Elena requested analysis of potential legal exposure for delayed customs processing of art and antiquities shipments. I spent the weekend learning that delayed customs processing was a euphemism for smuggling, and that the art and antiquities in question were almost certainly stolen or illegally exported from their countries of origin. The legal exposure was substantial if anyone decided to investigate, but the financial rewards made the risk worthwhile for Marcus's organization. My analysis was thorough and professional, outlining exactly how the operation violated international treaties, federal import laws, and customs regulations. I also included recommendations for improving their legal cover and reducing prosecutorial risk. When I finished, I stared at the document for an hour, recognizing that I'd just written a handbook for international crime. The payment arrived Monday morning, $5,000 in cash, delivered by the same silent courier. I deposited it immediately, watching my bank balance climb to numbers I'd never imagined having. The money felt clean in my hands, but I knew it was anything but. That afternoon, Elena called with my next assignment. Then Marcus texted about a dinner meeting to discuss long-term arrangements. The work was pulling me deeper into their world, each project making me more valuable and more complicit. Sarah noticed the change in my finances, of course. When I offered to pay for dinner at an expensive restaurant, when I mentioned looking at better apartments, when I bought groceries without checking prices, all of it registered with someone who'd watched me count pennies for months. "This new firm is really working out," she said over wine that cost more than our usual budget for an entire meal. "I'm so happy for you, Madison. You deserve this." The guilt was a physical pain in my chest. Sarah's genuine happiness for my success made everything worse, highlighting how far I drifted from the person she thought I was. "Yeah," I managed. "It's exactly what I needed." And in a horrible way, it was. The money was solving all my immediate problems while creating others I was only beginning to understand. I was becoming someone else, someone who could rationalize helping criminals as long as the compensation was sufficient. My phone buzzed with another message from Marcus. "Excellent work on the shipping analysis. Elena is very impressed. We have something more substantial for next week." I looked at Sarah, laughing at something on her phone, completely unaware that her roommate was becoming a criminal consultant. The distance between who I'd been and who I was becoming felt like a chasm I could never cross back over. The most terrifying part wasn't that I was helping criminals. It was how easy it was becoming to justify it. 2 months into my arrangement with Marcus's organization, I'd developed a routine that felt almost normal. Assignments arrived every Monday via courier, complex legal puzzles that I solved from the comfort of my apartment, while Sarah assumed I was building a legitimate consulting practice. The money flowed steadily, sometimes $5,000, sometimes more for particularly sensitive projects that required weekend work or accelerated timelines. I'd moved us to a better apartment in Midtown, explaining to Sarah that my firm had advanced me moving costs. She'd been thrilled about the upgraded kitchen and the building's amenities, never questioning how a newly established legal consultant could afford luxury accommodations. The lies came easier now, shaped by practice and necessity. But the work itself was becoming more complex, and I was learning details about Marcus's operations that I wished I could forget. The art and antiquities were just one branch of a sprawling international network that dealt in everything from conflict diamonds to endangered species artifacts. My legal research helped them navigate customs regulations, banking requirements, and the maze of international treaties that governed cross-border commerce. Each project taught me something new about criminal enterprise, and each payment made me more complicit in operations that violated laws I'd once sworn to uphold. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting, but the financial security was intoxicating. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck, wasn't calculating whether I could afford groceries or medication. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening while I was reviewing shipping manifests for a project involving cultural artifacts from Syria. Marcus's voice on the phone carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. "Ms. Harper, I need to see you tonight. There's been a development that requires immediate attention." "What kind of development?" I asked, though something in his tone made me not want to know the answer. "The kind best discussed in person. Can you meet me at the office in an hour?" The office was Elena's law firm in a gleaming downtown tower, a place I'd never visited but had seen in the background of video calls. Going there felt like crossing another line, moving from remote consultation to active participation in whatever crisis had prompted this meeting. "Is this about one of my projects?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Indirectly. Someone has been asking questions about our shipping operations. Questions that suggest they've seen documentation that should have remained confidential." The implication sent ice through my veins. Someone was investigating Marcus's organization, and they had access to materials I'd helped create. The legal analyses, the risk assessments, the recommendations for avoiding prosecution. If any of that fell into the wrong hands, it would implicate me as deeply as anyone in the criminal conspiracy. "I'll be there," I said, already reaching for my coat. The 40-floor tower that housed Vasquez and Associates was mostly dark by the time I arrived, but the security guard was expecting me. He escorted me to an elevator that required a special key, then up to the 38th floor, where Elena's office occupied a corner suite with panoramic views of the city. Marcus was waiting in the conference room, but he wasn't alone. Victor Kozlov sat at the head of the table, his presence turning the elegant space into something that felt more like an interrogation chamber. Elena paced near the windows, her usual composed demeanor replaced by visible tension. "Ms. Harper." Victor rose as I entered, his smile carrying the same cold calculation I remembered from the warehouse. "How fortunate that you could join us on such short notice." "What's this about?" I directed the question to Marcus, but Victor answered instead. "Someone has been investigating our operations. Someone with resources and connections that suggest federal involvement." He gestured to a chair across from him. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." As I took the offered seat, Elena placed a thick folder in front of me. "These are surveillance photos taken over the past month. Tell me if you recognize anyone." I opened the folder and immediately felt my world tilt sideways. The first photo showed me leaving my apartment building. The second captured me at a coffee shop near my old neighborhood. But it was the third photo that made my blood freeze. A clear shot of me entering the courier service where I'd been picking up assignments, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. "Someone's been watching me," I whispered. "Among others," Victor said. "The question is who and what they know about your involvement with our organization." I flipped through more photos, seeing myself at the bank, at the grocery store, having dinner with Sarah. The violation was complete and terrifying. Someone had been documenting my life with the thoroughness of a professional surveillance operation. "Federal agents?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted confirmation. "Possibly, or competitors seeking intelligence on our operations." Elena finally stopped pacing and took a seat beside Victor. "Either way, they've connected you to us, which creates complications." Marcus leaned forward, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "Ms. Harper, I need you to think very carefully. Have you discussed your work with anyone? Family, friends, professional contacts?" "No, of course not. I signed your non-disclosure agreement." But even as I said it, I was thinking about Sarah's questions, her observations about my changed financial circumstances. Had I been careless with details? What about your roommate? Victor's question hit like a physical blow. Sarah Chen, marketing professional, graduated from Emory with you. She's been asking questions about your new job. The fact that he knew Sarah's full name and professional background sent terror coursing through me. She's curious about my success, that's all. I haven't told her anything specific about my work. But she's noticed changes, Elena said, consulting notes from her own folder. The new apartment, the improved lifestyle, the fact that you're paying bills that were previously causing you stress. Smart people notice patterns, Ms. Harper. Sarah isn't a threat, I said quickly. She doesn't know anything about your organization. Victor's laugh was cold. Perhaps not yet, but investigations have a way of expanding. Today they're watching you. Tomorrow they're interviewing everyone in your life. Your roommate, your law school classmates, your professors, anyone who might provide insight into your recent activities. The scope of potential exposure was overwhelming. I thought about the money in my bank account, the consulting payments that would be impossible to explain to any federal investigator. I'd been so focused on the work itself that I hadn't considered how suspicious my financial transformation would appear to anyone looking closely. What do you want me to do? I asked. For now, continue your normal routine, Marcus said, but we need to accelerate certain aspects of your involvement with our organization. What does that mean? Elena opened another folder and withdrew a document I didn't recognize. We're establishing a new subsidiary, Harper Legal Consulting. You'll be the principal attorney, providing legitimate legal services to carefully selected clients. I stared at the corporate charter, seeing my name listed as the firm's managing partner. You can't just create a law firm without my consent. We're not creating it without your consent, Victor said smoothly. We're offering you the opportunity to legitimize your relationship with our organization in a way that provides cover for your previous consulting work. And if I refuse? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Victor's expression didn't change, but something predatory flickered in his eyes. Ms. Harper, you've been working with our organization for 2 months. You've received substantial compensation for services that involved reviewing documents related to international smuggling, money laundering, and customs fraud. Your legal analyses have been used to facilitate crimes that carry federal penalties of 20 years or more. The full weight of my situation crashed over me like a wave. I wasn't just a consultant anymore. I was a co-conspirator in a criminal enterprise. Every project I'd completed, every recommendation I'd made, had deepened my legal exposure until escape was no longer possible. So this isn't really an offer, I said. It's an opportunity, Elena corrected. The chance to transform your consultation work into a legitimate legal practice that provides excellent cover for continued operations. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand, the gesture surprisingly gentle. Ms. Harper, Madison, I understand this is overwhelming, but you need to understand that you're part of our family now. We protect our family, but we also expect loyalty from them. What kind of loyalty? The kind that recognizes mutual dependence, Victor said. You need us to protect you from the legal consequences of your previous work. We need you to provide ongoing legal services that help us navigate an increasingly complex regulatory environment. Elena slid another document across the table. Partnership agreement for Harper Legal Consulting. 60% ownership to you, 40% to our holding company. Guaranteed income of $20,000 per month, plus bonuses for special projects. $20,000 per month was more money than I'd ever dreamed of earning. Enough to eliminate my student loans entirely within a year and establish the kind of financial security that had seemed impossible just months earlier. But it was also a golden cage, locking me into Marcus's organization permanently. The surveillance, I said. What happens about that? We're investigating, Victor replied. But having you established as a legitimate attorney makes certain defensive measures more feasible. What kind of defensive measures? Marcus and Victor exchanged a look that suggested I didn't want to know the details. The kind that protect valuable assets, Victor said finally. I thought about Sarah, about my law school classmates, about everyone who might be drawn into whatever was coming. The surveillance photos had shown just me, but investigations had a way of expanding to include anyone connected to the target. I need guarantees, I said. My roommate, my friends, they stay out of this. Whatever protection you're offering me extends to them. Of course, Marcus said quickly. We have no interest in involving innocent parties. But Victor's expression suggested a different perspective. Ms. Harper, in our experience, there are very few truly innocent parties, but we can certainly take steps to ensure that your personal relationships remain undisturbed. The way he said undisturbed made my skin crawl, but I was running out of options. The surveillance meant that whoever was investigating already knew about my connection to Marcus's organization. My only choice was to formalize that relationship in a way that provided legal cover and protected the people I cared about. I'll need to review the partnership documents, I said. Naturally, Elena replied. You have until tomorrow evening to provide your decision. And if someone approaches me before then? If federal agents want to interview me about my consulting work? Victor's smile was sharp as a blade. Then you exercise your right to legal counsel and refer all questions to your attorney, who, conveniently, will be Elena. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises of protection, but as I rode the elevator down to street level, I felt like I was descending into something much deeper than a simple business arrangement. The city lights blurred past the elevator's glass walls, and I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. A young woman in expensive clothes, carrying documents that would transform her into a criminal attorney, whether she wanted the role or not. Outside, the night air was cool against my face, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every parked car might contain surveillance equipment. Every pedestrian might be documenting my movements. The paranoia that had been building for weeks crystallized into something sharp and constant. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Working late again? There's leftover Chinese if you want some. The normalcy of the message felt like a lifeline to a world I was rapidly leaving behind. Sarah was home making dinner and worrying about me, completely unaware that her roommate was about to become a managing partner in a criminal law firm. I texted back, on my way home, save me some lo mein. But as I walked toward the subway, I knew that the woman who came home tonight would be different from the one who'd left. Tomorrow, I would sign documents that would make me a full partner in Marcus Volkov's organization, with all the protection and danger that entailed. The most terrifying part wasn't what I was becoming. It was how much I wanted the security and power they were offering, even knowing the price I'd have to pay for it. The federal agents arrived at 7 a.m, their badges gleaming in the hallway light as Sarah opened our apartment door. I heard their voices from my bedroom, calm, professional, requesting to speak with Madison Harper regarding a financial matter. My blood turned to ice as I recognized the sound that had haunted my nightmares for weeks. Madison, Sarah called, her voice tight with confusion and fear. There are some people here to see you. I wrapped my bathrobe tighter and walked to the living room on unsteady legs. 2 agents stood in our small entryway, a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair, and a younger man whose eyes missed nothing as they catalogued our improved apartment, the expensive coffee maker, the new furniture that didn't match my previous financial situation. Ms. Harper, the woman said, showing her credentials. I'm Agent Patricia Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Division. This is Agent Rodriguez. We'd like to ask you some questions about recent changes in your financial circumstances. Sarah's face went white. She looked between me and the agents with growing horror, beginning to understand that whatever I'd told her about my consulting work had been built on lies. The betrayal in her eyes was almost worse than the fear I felt for my own future. I need to call my lawyer, I managed. Of course, Agent Chen said. though we're hoping for a cooperative conversation. We're investigating a pattern of suspicious banking activity, and your name has come up in connection with our inquiries. My hands shook as I reached for my phone and dialed Elena's number. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been expecting this call. "Don't say anything," she said before I could speak. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The wait was excruciating. The agents made small talk with Sarah, who answered their questions about our living situation with growing distress. Yes, I'd recently come into money. Yes, I'd been working for a consulting firm. No, she didn't know the specific name of the company. Each answer felt like another nail in my coffin, proof of the deception I'd been living for months. When Elena finally arrived, she swept into the apartment like a force of nature, her expensive suit and commanding presence immediately shifting the dynamic in the room. "Agent Chen," she said, as if greeting an old acquaintance. "How nice to see you again. I trust you have warrants for whatever fishing expedition you're conducting this morning?" "Just a friendly conversation, counselor, though if Ms. Harper prefers to make this formal." "She does," Elena cut in smoothly. "My client will be exercising her right to counsel. Any further questions can be directed through my office." The agents left with polite promises to be in touch, but the damage was done. Sarah stood in our kitchen, arms wrapped around herself, staring at me like I'd become a stranger. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "Because the Madison I know doesn't have FBI agents showing up at 7 in the morning asking about suspicious financial activity." I opened my mouth to lie again, to construct another explanation that would preserve our friendship and my cover. But looking at Sarah's face, hurt, confused, betrayed, I couldn't find the words. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I can't tell you what's happening, but I'm in trouble, and now you might be too." Elena placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Ms. Harper, we need to leave immediately. Sarah, I strongly advise you to limit any further discussion of this matter with anyone, for your own protection." The warning was delivered with Elena's usual professional polish, but Sarah was smart enough to recognize a threat when she heard one. She nodded silently, tears beginning to form in her eyes as she watched me gather a few belongings and follow Elena out of the apartment that had briefly felt like home. The car ride to Elena's office passed in tense silence. Outside, Atlanta's morning traffic provided a surreal backdrop of normalcy, while my life imploded around me. When we reached the law firm, Elena led me directly to a secure conference room where Marcus and Victor were already waiting. "It's accelerated," Elena said without preamble. "Federal financial crimes investigation, at least 2 agents assigned. They know about the banking activity." Victor's expression was thunderous. "How much do they know?" "Enough to connect Madison to suspicious deposits, not enough to understand the source." Yet, Elena moved to a wall safe and withdrew several documents. "We need to implement the contingency plan immediately." Marcus turned to me, his face grave. "Madison, I need you to understand something. What's happening now isn't just about your consulting work anymore. The federal investigation threatens our entire operation, and that makes you either an asset or a liability." "What does that mean?" "It means," Victor said coldly, "that your cooperation is no longer optional. You will help us manage this crisis, or you will become part of the permanent solution to our security problem." The euphemism sent ice through my veins. I'd seen Victor's approach to problem solving, his preference for eliminating complications rather than managing them. The partnership agreement I'd been considering was no longer an offer. It was a life sentence disguised as a business opportunity. "What do you need me to do?" Elena spread documents across the conference table. "First, we establish Harper Legal Consulting immediately. The corporate charter, banking arrangements, professional insurance, everything needs to be in place within 48 hours. Second," Marcus continued, "you provide us with detailed information about the federal investigation. What questions they asked, what evidence they referenced, what their timeline might be. And third, Victor added with a smile that made my blood run cold. You help us identify and neutralize the source of their information. The word neutralize hung in the air like a promise of violence. I thought about the surveillance photos, the careful documentation of my movements over the past month. Someone had been feeding information to federal investigators, and Victor wanted me to help him find out who. I don't know anything about their investigation beyond what happened this morning, I said. But you will, Elena replied. Agent Chen will want to interview you again, probably with an offer of immunity in exchange for cooperation. When she does, you'll be wearing recording equipment provided by our technical team. The scope of what they were asking hit me like a physical blow. They wanted me to spy on federal investigators, to gather intelligence that would help a criminal organization evade prosecution. It was a level of criminal conspiracy that would destroy any possibility of legitimate legal practice. This is insane, I whispered. You're asking me to commit federal crimes that carry decades in prison. We're asking you to survive, Victor corrected. Because if this investigation succeeds, everyone connected to our organization faces prosecution, including you, for the consulting work you've already completed. He was right, and we all knew it. The legal analyses I'd provided, the recommendations for avoiding detection, the detailed reviews of criminal schemes, all of it would be evidence of my participation in a continuing criminal enterprise. I was already facing serious federal charges. The only question was whether I'd be prosecuted as a minor participant or a major conspirator. What about my roommate? Sarah doesn't know anything about your organization. Perhaps not, Elena said. But she knows about your financial circumstances, your work patterns, your recent behavior. Federal investigators will interview her extensively, and they're very skilled at extracting information from cooperative witnesses. She's not a threat to you. Victor's laugh was cold. Ms. Harper, everyone is a potential threat when federal investigators are involved. Your roommate, your law school classmates, your professors, anyone who can provide insight into your recent activities, becomes a problem to be managed. The implication was clear. Sarah's safety depended on my cooperation, just as my own survival was contingent on helping them evade federal prosecution. They'd created a web of mutual dependence that made escape impossible for anyone caught within it. I need guarantees, I said, written agreements that Sarah and anyone else in my life stays safe regardless of what happens with this investigation. Marcus exchanged a look with Victor, some silent communication passing between them. That can be arranged, Marcus said finally. But the guarantees run both ways. Your protection of our interests ensures our protection of your interests. Elena placed a pen beside the partnership documents. Harper Legal Consulting needs a managing partner immediately. The federal investigation makes delay impossible. I stared at the contracts that would formalize my transformation from desperate law school graduate to criminal attorney. $20,000 per month. Partnership in a legitimate business, protection from federal prosecution, all in exchange for becoming a permanent member of Marcus Volkov's organization. The alternative was prosecution for crimes I'd already committed, federal prison, the destruction of anyone connected to me. Sarah would be interviewed, investigated, potentially charged as an accessory if prosecutors decided to make an example of the case. What happens to the people who were feeding information to the FBI? I asked. Victor's smile was predatory. They learn the consequences of betraying business partners, permanently. I signed the documents with a hand that trembled only slightly, watching my legal name become forever associated with criminal enterprise. Elena witnessed my signature with professional efficiency, and Marcus shook my hand like we'd just concluded a routine business transaction. Welcome to the organization, partner, he said. Your first case will be defending yourself against federal conspiracy charges. That afternoon, I returned to the apartment to find Sarah packing her belongings with mechanical efficiency. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red from crying, but her expression coldly determined. I'm staying with my sister until I find a new place, she said without preamble. I don't know what you're involved in, Madison, but I can't be part of it. Sarah, Please let me explain. Explain what? That the FBI showed up this morning asking about your suspicious banking activity? That your lawyer threatened me for my own protection? She threw clothes into a suitcase with violent motions. I thought I knew you, but apparently I didn't know anything. I wanted to tell her the truth, to explain how I'd stumbled into this situation through desperate accident rather than criminal intent. But Elena's warnings echoed in my mind. The less Sarah knew, the safer she would be when federal investigators came calling. I never meant for any of this to happen, I said quietly. But it did happen. And now I have to assume that everything you've told me for the past 3 months was a lie. Sarah zipped her suitcase closed and turned to face me. I hope whatever you're getting paid is worth it, Madison, because you've lost the only real friend you had. After she left, I sat alone in our apartment, my apartment now, surrounded by expensive furniture bought with criminal money. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of appliances I could suddenly afford and the distant sound of traffic carrying normal people to normal jobs. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Elena will brief you on tomorrow's strategy session. Wear something professional. We're meeting with the technical team. I stared at the message, understanding that tomorrow would bring new instructions, new crimes, new steps deeper into an organization that had already claimed my professional future and personal relationships. The Madison Harper who'd accidentally taken the wrong suitcase no longer existed. In her place was someone who could rationalize espionage and conspiracy as necessary survival tactics. The most terrifying realization wasn't that I'd become a criminal. It was that I was beginning to think like one, calculating risks and benefits rather than right and wrong. Marcus's organization hadn't just bought my services. They'd purchased my moral compass and pointed it toward survival rather than justice. As night fell over Atlanta, I stood at my window looking down at a city where federal agents were building a case against people like me, where my former roommate was telling her sister about the criminal she'd been living with, where somewhere in the shadows, Marcus Volkov's people were planning permanent solutions to their problems. Tomorrow, I would put on a professional suit and attend a meeting about recording devices in federal investigations. I would become an active participant in criminal conspiracy rather than just a consultant. And somewhere in the process, the last vestiges of the lawyer I'd planned to become would disappear completely. The wrong suitcase had cost me everything I'd thought I wanted. But as I stood in my luxurious apartment, looking at bank statements that showed more money than I'd ever possessed, I had to admit the truth Elena and Marcus had known from the beginning. I hadn't lost everything. I'd just discovered what I was willing to sacrifice for security, and the price had been easier to pay than I'd ever imagined possible.